views and opinions expressed in this program are those of the participants and do not necessarily reflect the views of BronxNet or the program underwriters.
Welcome to Public Health America. I'm your host, Dr. William Latimer. It is such a pleasure to have on our program today, Terre Roche of the singing group, the Roches. Terre, welcome.
Thanks, Bill. Thanks for having me on again.
My pleasure. So this is our second segment together on the spotlight on the arts of Public Health America. Why are we doing it? Because the arts in the form of music and fine arts and other forms of expression are so critical to promoting health and public health and physical health. There's lots of studies that prove that. And our focus today is on the music of the Roches, possibly the greatest vocal trio of the second half of the 20th century, played on SNL, The Tonight Show, played nationally, internationally, played with folks that we know, Paul Simon, Robert Fripp, Tony Levin, among many, many others. Terre, you know, is a father of three young daughters. You know, I can't even possibly imagine the affection, pride, whatever the right words would be, that your parent or parents must have felt. And that's not to, you know, goodness knows the journey that the three of you made in the 70s when, you know, I think it's fair to say, though you would know better than me, that, you know, women in popular music was still a relatively novel thing. And you know, navigated those treacherous waters. But I'm really, I've watched a lot of your interviews, and of course, I've been a fan for years. Tell us about your parents. Who raised these three amazing people and singers?
Well, my parents they met in Buffalo, New York, where they were both part of a small theater company. And as the story goes, my father was kind of the star of the show, and my mother had a walk-on part in one of the plays. And actually, one of the members of the cast was Charles Durning, who
wow.
we knew when we were growing up. We were always going to see Charlie in these off-Broadway plays
Sure.
and stuff, because, you know, before he made it big in the movies and the theater. So my parents had this experience, but then when they moved to New York, they went into the advertising business. My father did. He did commercials for Chrysler. And so that was how, you know, he took care of the family, was with that work. But he always, well, first of all, our mother always encouraged us to do things like draw pictures and write stories. And, you know, if somebody you never would say, I'm bored. You know, like no one cared if you were bored, you know. It's like if you were bored, you had to figure out how to entertain yourself. And in our house, it was, I remember my mother would say, why don't you go to your room and draw a picture, you know? And so you'd go and you'd spend hours drawing like elaborate pictures and, you know, and so we kind of grew up having that kind of an activity as something to how you live your life. I had no desire or feeling of like, oh, I want to be a performer on stage. What happened was Maggie was given a guitar for Christmas in 1964, which of course everyone wanted to play guitar. The Beatles, we wanted to be the Beatles. And so there was a show on PBS, How to Play Folk Guitar with Laura Weber. And we watched that show, my sisters, my mother and I, and we would pass the guitar back and, you try the C
That's great.
chord, you try the D chord. We didn't know anything about music. We had never had a music lesson, but we learned these folk songs with these chords on the guitar. And Maggie immediately started writing her own songs. So, and our father had a friend who was a member of the Democratic Club of the town. And the town was a Republican North Jersey, Bergen County town. But so our friend heard us rehearsing in the bedroom and said, why don't the girls come to the VFW hall and sing for the local candidates? Our father put lyrics to one of the folk songs that we had learned on the TV, and it was all about the candidates, that were running. And so we were invited to come. Now, I was probably 12. Maggie was 13 at that point. We were we were just little kids, and our mother made matching outfits for us, So the thing that happened next was that there was a state senator at the dinner dance at the VFW, and he asked if we could come and sing at his campaign. And this turned into the Governor Hughes at the time of New Jersey. He wanted us to come. So we had this little thing where, I remember them coming to class where I was in school and calling me out of class because the governor wants you to come down to some mall somewhere, in another town to sing these campaign songs.
That's great.
That was our start in in performing.
That's wonderful. I didn't know that. That's an amazing story.
Yeah.
Let's fast forward a bit in terms of, so if one looks at the standard literature on the Roches, the first thing that you see is folk. And I've always felt, okay, that's okay. Three acoustic guitars and 3-part harmony, obviously other instruments throughout the many albums you've made. But I want to ask you about your early or the range of your influences. I was watching a film not long ago about bluegrass, and it just struck me that the kind of tight 3-part harmonies reminded me sometimes about the Roches. The Roches music is quite variable. There isn't one kind of Roches song, but I'd love to hear from you. What were some of your early influences or just music that you enjoyed?
Well, I would say there were 3 main influences. One of them was that we were always in the choir at school. So we learned how to be part of a section, and we didn't read music, but you would be able to pick up from the other people in your section what the part was. And that training was great. The other thing was, of course, learning the guitar from Laura Weber on folk guitar with Laura Weber. And then the third thing was the AM radio in the 1960s, which was very diverse. You'd hear all sorts of different kinds of music. It was before radio had become formatted, where you'd go to this station for this kind of song. And then, every song would have that same sound. In those days, you'd have different things on the same station, WABC and WMCA in New York City. And so we listened, to all of those hit songs. The other influence that I feel like I had was my mother loved what she referred to as classical music. She was also an untrained person, but she played piano by ear. She played everything in the key of C, and she was amazing how she found melodies and things. But she and I used to go like to the opera, and she would play classical pieces like by Rachmaninoff. And I I remember there was a Grieg concerto that she used to play a lot. So there was this idea that you just listened to things, but there was no sense of that people were making a living at this. It was,
Sure.
we didn't know anybody that did that,
That's wonderful. One of the famous stories in my family is during a hurricane. I think it was in the 80s on Cape Cod. My grandmother played Rock of Ages on the piano after the power went out. And that has always stayed with me. And I've yet to learn that song, but I'm going to do it.
Yes,
Because,
you have to.
So, and you know what? It's just so great to hear you say that being in the choir in school was formative for you. It's just another example of how arts in schools, public or private, I don't know if you're in public or private, but the arts in public schools is just so critical. And I have daughters that are in chorus. They love it. They sing all the time, and I'm always working with them on harmonies. And let's face it, I'm sure the study has been done. Cognitive development and the ability to sing harmony. I mean, that there's all kinds of positive things that are happening by virtue of that experience. I'm going to look up Laura Weber. Clearly, we owe her a collective thanks. One of the things I'd say about the Roches is, their vocals are so amazing that nobody talks about the guitars. But the reality is, you guys were pretty great guitar players. And I'm not sure that that's necessarily been highlighted so much because the vocals were so amazing. And then, of course, you're welcome. And then, pre-video, radio was everything. And it had a major impact. So we're going to take a quick break. When we return, Terry Roche is going to tell us a little bit more about the music of the Roches and a very, very exciting upcoming release in 2022 of some basement tapes, some newly found original recordings from Terry Roche and Maggie Roche from the 1970s, which we're very, very excited about. This is Public Health America. I'm Dr. William Latimer. We'll be right back.
If you're struggling to afford your internet bills during the pandemic, there's a temporary government program that may be able to help. It's called the Emergency Broadband Benefit, and it provides up to $50 monthly discount on your broadband bill to qualifying households. Find more information about the program, including if you qualify and how to enroll, at fcc.gov/broadbandbenefit, or call toll-free at 833-511-0311. That's 833-511-0311.
Welcome back to Public Health America. I'm your host, Dr. William Latimer. So we're here today with Terry Roche of the Roches, three sisters that did just phenomenal albums and performances from the 1970s through the 2000s. I actually saw a Roches performance in New York City, and it was just one of those moments. I would say the Roches, Joni Mitchell, maybe one other person, Coco Taylor, that, just as amazing as the albums were, sounded better live. And believe me, that's saying a lot because, particularly, and now I'll sound like an old guy, these days, there's just so much technology thrown at music that you don't really know what do these people sound like. And when I saw the Roches just with 3 guitars and 3 voices, it was like you had entered the gates of heaven. So Terry, we're going to talk a little bit about the Roches music. I'd like to, just who wrote the song, any backstory. In 1979, the 3 sisters did, in effect, a re-debut of that trio, the Roches. Quitting Time, Hammond song, just 2 absolute favorites. Who wrote them? What can you tell us about it?
Quitting Time and Hammond Song were both written by my sister Maggie. And I have to say, Maggie had a really almost otherworldly thing with writing songs, she just would find things, and I really can't tell you how she did that because I was busy doing my part of the job, which was to take the song and figure out where I was going to be in the harmony, and also figure out what I'm going to do in the guitar part to be in service of that song. So even though we all wrote, and sometimes we collaborated 2 at a time or 3 at a time, but it's not until after the whole thing was over and we had made all these records, I think there were 13 Roches records all told. It's not until it was all over that I was able to listen with some distance. And I have to say, I love listening back to the stuff we did, and I'm amazed. I don't really remember doing it, which most people will tell you that, I think, about, creative output, because you're not archiving as you go along, you're outputting,
Right.
know. But it's just great to have this body of work to go back and think, wow, that was pretty amazing.
Absolutely amazing. And what a lovely testimony to the enormous talent of Maggie Roche. Moving on to Keep On Doing, an album in 1982. You worked with Robert Fripp again, I believe, and a song. Did he play guitar on Losing True?
Yes. And that's Maggie's song as well, Losing True. On the Keep On Doing record, the whole premise was that we had the first Roches record with Robert Fripp. It was his idea to do it very bare bones, in some cases live, sitting around, voices and guitars sitting around in a semicircle. For the third one, we wanted to add more kind of, thicken the sound up. So everything was triple tracked.
Okay.
Those tracks like Losing True, those were like singing the track 3 times.
Yep.
And then the guitars, really going at it. I remember one of the reviews of that record, the person said, "This is like heavy metal folk music." And, there was something fierce and driving for me about that third Roches record.
Sure. That's
Keep
great.
On
No, that's fantastic. And, it's interesting to compare your recordings that are single tracked versus triple tracked. I don't know what you'll think about this comparison, but I've always felt that Karen Carpenter just had a lovely contralto voice, and there were recordings she did that were just a single voice, and then others obviously were she and her brother triple tracked, the that went on forever, and that was kind of signature of their music. Let's go forward to 1989. the album Speak. Everyone is Good, another favorite. Tell us a little bit about that song.
Well, that one, to double back into the parents, that song was written. First of all, my songs are pretty. They come very quickly. I sit down and write the whole song usually. Every once in a while, there'll be like just a couple verses, and I have to figure out how to put the whole thing together. But that song, which came all at once, was after a conversation I had on the phone with my father. And he and I were kind of gossiping about everybody that we knew, everybody in the family, everybody we knew. And when I got off the phone, my phone machine had recorded this whole conversation. And I listened back to it, and I heard both of us, what's wrong with this person? Well, this person needs to do this, and that person should be doing this. And my response to that was that everyone is good, even though you're different from the other person. It was almost like I was doing penance
Right.
for the phone conversation by acknowledging that just because you're different from somebody doesn't mean that they're wrong.
Sure.
What they're doing.
Well, no, and out of that came a wonderful, beautiful song. I think it was Orson Welles who said, "We don't love people despite their faults. We love them for them." And I think that sentiment is consistent with that anecdote. One more song before we segue into Seductive Reasoning and the re-release. The final Roches album, I believe, was Moonswept in 2007. A lovely song, Instead I Choose. Very bitter, sweet, very tender. I would say a little raw even, but I mean that in a good way. Tell us about Instead I Choose.
Okay, Instead I Chose, which is the past tense, was a set of lyrics that Suzy gave me, and I put the music to it. So that was a collaboration between me and Suzy. And that's one of my favorite Roches songs. I think it has a magic that it's one of those things, the sum of the parts, the lyrics and then the music together. Just, I don't know, something about her, what she was saying in the lyrics really kind of inspired me to come up with this whole thing. And it was in a guitar tuning that I wasn't used to working in. So there was a lot of adventurous things that I was able to do with that. But yeah, I love that song.
Lovely song. Instead I Chose. So we're gonna turn back the time, turn back the clock to just a fantastic album, Seductive Reasoning, 1975, Maggie Roche, Terry Roche. Tell us a little bit about West Virginia, and that will segue into your telling us about a release of new old material.
Yeah, West Virginia, Maggie wrote that song. This was when we had been on a tour of colleges all over the country that went on for about 2 years. And she wrote that song while we were on tour. We went to West Virginia several times during the college tour. And she wrote it on the piano, and on the record, I sing the vocal. And so the record was called Seductive Reasoning, and it was it came out in 1975. It was produced in part by Paul Simon and Paul Samuel Smith, who was one of the producers. He had produced all the Cat Stevens records. And he also was in the Yardbirds as the bass player. And then David Hood, who was the bass player in the Muscle Shoals rhythm section. If you don't know who they are, there's a great movie about Muscle Shoals. It was an amazing scene down in Alabama.
Yep.
So that was the seductive reasoning record. And so what Bill is talking about is that recently I was sent some live recordings of me and Maggie, just the two of us, with our voices and guitars, and at times her piano. That there were two different people who had recorded these live performances of ours, and I didn't know that there were any, and I had not kept any live performances of us either. So that's the release that I'm going to do in 2022, is to put out this record of live performances. And the recordings have never been released before, but there's also a few songs that have never been released, maybe 3 or 4 songs that are going to be on this. So I'm very excited about putting this out, especially since these arrangements were before it went into the studio and was produced,
Right.
So I think it's going to be very inspiring to people, because we didn't mastering and engineering this. My friend Tom Miliotto, who cleaned these tracks up, but did not change anything that was done. So you have both of us live playing these guitars, and so some of the guitar work is remarkable to me. Sometimes I'm like, uh-oh, like I'll take a solo and I'll think, uh-oh, I hope this person, lands
Right.
on a chord,
Sure, that's great. I mean, what good fortune for you, but a great fortune for us, lovers of the Roches music. And I'm sure I'm absolutely certain I'm not alone to say that we are collectively anxiously awaiting the release of that new material. And with a little luck, when that release takes place, we'd love to have you back on the show, and we can share perhaps some of those clips. I want to thank Terre Roche. This has been such a special segment of Public Health America, a spotlight on the arts. And there have been numerous points that Terre has made that, in my view, demonstrate the significance of the arts, in this case music, to promote health and mental health and provide people creative opportunities to enhance their lives. This is Public Health America. I'm your host, Dr. William Latimer. Take care. See you next time.